Hello, everyone. Welcome to Bite Size Live. I am your host, Kyler Cheatham from The Confluential. And today we have a very cool, little bit different conversation that we're talking about, which is all about resilience and really the art of quote unquote losing. I think resilience is one of the pieces that's most underserved and talked about when it comes to project management, any type of technical project management. It's definitely something that we look for at the Confluential and a lot of our team members to make sure that we can fail forward. So that's kind of what we're digging into today. My guest, Mick McCurry, is one of our associate consultants here at the Confluential. He's certainly a rising star, but he's also a collegiate athlete. And I think a lot of times when you get to that top tier in sports, you really kind of what that means as far as failing forward or the art of losing, getting back up and being able to go back into either the game or the marketplace with a better understanding of how you can improve. So I'm really excited to have him here for the conversation. Before I let him introduce himself, I'm just going to go through just a few logistics. So Bite Size is my live podcast. It gets turned into some shorter form podcasts. You can find it wherever you get your podcast. You can also follow us on YouTube and watch all of the episodes. So I invite you to do that. I also welcome and appreciate your feedback. The reason we take our time to do this is so that we can provide value to the technical community in going through something that is as complex as any technology implementation or innovation project. So if you have episode ideas, drop them in the chat or DM me. I always appreciate that. Speaking of the chat, the fun part about this conversation is we always integrate your insights and questions. So I invite you to drop them in the chat wherever you're joining us from today. Even if you're watching on replay, we still go back in and answer all of those questions. So definitely drop them in the chat. And if you don't mind, we'll just test that feature quickly. If you could just let us know where you're joining from today, that would be excellent. And we have a global audience. So I'm always excited to see where people are tuning in from. So with that, thank you so much for joining us, Mick. I'm so excited to have you.
I'm very excited to be here this morning. Like Kyler said, I'm Mick McCurry. I'm an associate consultant at the Confluential. I'm coming up on a year here at the Confluential, so that's very exciting. And yeah, my background is I'm originally from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, born and raised, and then moved to Colorado and got my business finance degree while I was playing basketball at Colorado Mesa University, and was fortunate enough to land a position at the Confluential. And so I think there's a lot of transferable truths that go from uh, my sports background and student athlete background into what I do today for the Confluential. And I think that there's a lot of benefit to that background. So I'm excited to talk to you about it today.
Yeah, and Mick is being humble with his basketball career. I think it was one of the first times that you guys Sweet 16 tournament. So it was a very and I don't want to butcher it because I know nothing about basketball, but it was a very big accomplishment and a very talented team. So talk to us a little bit about how kind of basketball taught you about resilience and understanding of and finding opportunities from that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing basketball has taught me that has, like I said, it's been like a transferable truth throughout like a lot of facets of my life. I think has just been the ability to learn from losing and like those mistakes and to continue to strive to get better. And I know that sounds cliche, but it really is the truth. Like you are no basketball team has an undefeated record, um,
Mhm.
especially throughout their career. And so I think taking those lessons of whatever it may be, something as simple as communicating better with your team or taking practice more seriously or getting in the gym uh, during that time and no one's watching you, like those really do pay off for you. And it's like, oh, maybe I should have been working harder. And I think that when you're able to fail and learn something from it, you kind of reframe it as a learning moment as opposed to failure. And I think that's the biggest thing is it's not like, oh, I failed, like I should feel bad. It's like, okay, what can I learn from this as opposed to get down on yourself. And that's kind of where you regroup. I think is that's the biggest thing is you regroup from those moments and you learn something and you get better. So
Yeah, it's data, right? It's, it's interesting. I always, I think hiring athletes is something that we always look for because of just the challenge of these types of projects that we manage. And I'll kind of talk about how that translates from athletics. But I am getting some feedback from our team that my audio is cutting
okay.
out. So just, that's the point of live conversations. Can you hear me okay or
I can
no?
hear you just fine.
Okay, cool. And then the audience, now, can you hear me okay? It's always when these streaming things happen, we never know. And that's the point of, transparent
Yep.
failing. So I was like, behind the scenes, and I'm like, why don't I just ask him? So if you can't hear me, if you don't mind just letting me know in the comments and I can switch my mic here. But kind of back on track to talking about what that looks like as far as how that translates. And I've seen many of, especially our rising star consultants that I've worked with throughout my career be college athletes. And I think that is through just my research of managing and running consulting firms, is a very organic transition because of just the complexity of projects that we do. So when we walk in to a project, a lot of times we walked into a very tense environment. The team is frustrated, the vendor is frustrated, the SI is frustrated, or they're very nervous because they're about to spend millions of dollars on a technology that they don't really understand. And when we look at specifically larger implementations, we either have an ERP implementation that happens like once every 30 years, right? So ideally, or traditionally your team hasn't done that before. Or you're working with a brand new technology that you have no idea how AI or predictive analytics or anything like that is going to operate in your environment. And so a lot of times there can be a ton of failure, and the project failure comes from not talking or giving open air to those issues that you're featuring or experiencing in the project. And that's one thing that I don't think you can get away from in athletics. If you fail on the basketball court, it's pretty obvious, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and you kind of have to walk off the court and own that and say, yeah, I should have done something different, or yeah, that was, a mistake or thing. And being able to kind of practice that narrative, especially as a young person, and have that humility and vulnerability to say, I should have done something different. But that's a data point for me, and I'm going to learn from it. And I wonder if that's kind of what you experience as well, Mick, in kind of working on these projects and being an athlete for your entire career.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I mean, just how you said the coming at it with humility, because I mean, like you said, on a basketball court, it's obvious who messes up, especially to people on the team and people in the arena. And it's easy to get defensive in moments and point fingers, right? Like it's easy to no, it's not me, it was that person, it was X, Y, it was Z. But I think that being like, okay, I can take accountability for that, and then like next time I'll do it differently, or just having that open communication and not, I mean, it sounds cliche, but failing forward and like taking that feedback
Mhm,
and activating it is one of the biggest advantages to like being a good team player. I think it's so important to
mhm,
be able to take feedback as not like a personal attack, and just like, okay, we can now make this step forward and make this next jump into whatever it may be, whether it's a better defensive play, getting your feet square to the hoop on a shot, catching ready to shoot, things like that. It's oftentimes what I've learned is like it's in the nuance of things. It's not like typically you get the
mhm,
big picture stuff right as a basketball team, but it's the little stuff like were we talking on defense? Were we pushing the ball in transition?
mhm,
All those little details add up to what it's like a successful outcome for us. And on top of that, I think it comes down to when things aren't going your way and you feel like you've had a rough, I don't know, few minutes of play, we'll say, or a few rough
mhm,
meetings, that's not indicative of how the game can go for you and like just weathering the storm sometimes. Because sometimes that's all you can do is, teams are going to make shots, meetings are going to go poorly, but being able to work
Mhm.
through that and know that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, I think is something that I have also taken with me with my background because it's not always going to be pretty. And I think that's a misconception people have in athletics and in the ERP realm and software implementations. I think that
Yeah.
knowing that there's going to be like some days where you just got to put your head down and figure it out and do your best. Like that's probably one of the biggest things too.
Absolutely. And in our industry, as you mentioned, that is a huge misconception because there's so many millions, really billions of marketing
Right.
dollars that go in from these vendors to say, this is a plug and play. It makes them feel like it's just a flip the switch. And when we don't have the expectations of like, hey, we're playing a hard team here, or we're going into a hard tournament, and there's nothing, I promise you absolutely nothing that you can do to make your implementation easy. And if you're trying to find that silver bullet, then that's where you're going to get in
Yep.
trouble because there is nothing easy about going through this type of change or implementation. And it shouldn't be easy. That's the point. Sustainable change comes from putting in the work, just like getting in the weight room and getting
Yep.
stronger, or doing technique
Mhm.
drills, shooting all those
Mhm. Yep. Yep.
free
Yep.
free throws, and just sitting from the line and being able to shoot. And that's something that people don't understand, that you have to really put all of those different kind of tiny little micro habits into creating something big. And that's how you are sustainable, not just plugging something in. But that's not what the industry wants you to think. And I always talk about, I don't think there's another industry that openly lies to their clients as opposed to like the cartel or organized
Right.
crime, right? Because a lot of times that's what they want you to do. They want you to buy the software, and then it's your job to implement it. That's not their problem. They got their SaaS license. The minute you sign on that dotted line, you're paying for that software no matter how you decide to use it. That's on you. And that can be something that is really, really challenging, especially for smaller to mid-sized businesses to really understand, because they don't have, billions in overhead to just waste on software or
Right.
shelfware that's just sitting there.
Mhm.
So let's go to some of these great questions in the comments here. Thank you so much for joining us. So let's do this one from Avery here. In your transition from athlete to consultant, where did you see a gap and how did you overcome that? That's such a good
That is a
question.
great question. I would say the biggest thing in my transition from student athlete to being a consultant is the structure of my day. Like when I
Mhm,
started this role, um, it was tough. My day was built for me as a student athlete. You have class, you have
mhm,
weights, you have practice, you have the extra shots, you have film, you have all these different things. You have team meals, you have team activities to, build relationships outside of the game. Um, and that pretty much takes all your day. And by the time the day is over, it's like, well, I'm gonna go home and sleep now. So, but building that structure into my consulting role has been something huge for me. You pick and choose what to
mhm,
prioritize, how to prioritize, and then giving yourself an action plan each and every day. And so I think that kind of diving into that and being like, okay, this is what I'm going to accomplish today. Here's how I'm going to accomplish it, and then just trying to execute at the highest level. And then I would say part of it too is I think when you have a good relationship with the head coach or your boss, it's easy
mhm,
to go to them when you're struggling with something like, "Hey, like my
mhm,
jumper doesn't feel right," or "Hey, I'm struggling with this concept on this against like this X team." And so to approach it with humility and like, "Hey, I don't know how to do this. Can you help me? I'm struggling with this."
mhm,
And again, just having that humility
mhm,
and ability to um, ask for help, I think is something that
mhm,
was part of that transition as well. And so yeah, I would just say the structure and that ability to communicate clearly and know when you need help is probably the two biggest things that were gaps, and then overcoming it, just humility, big thing at how I
Yeah.
approach things. So that's good.
Absolutely. And you can, even reframe that to, again, you're gathering
Yeah,
data. And I think, that's one thing that I always rave about with Mick is he's constantly looking for feedback, seeking that. And just kind of break down what you said. I think it's so important to kind of talk about that transition from the classroom, whether you're an athlete or you're not an athlete, to a consulting role. And I always believe in transparency around consulting. Consulting is a different type of job. It's something where your day is not structured, right? You need to structure and manage your time effectively for your community at your consultancy, but also for your
right.
clients. And that can be very weird for students because I don't tell you what time class starts, right? I'm not tracking your grades nor your deliverables. And that's all on you. And a lot of times that doesn't work for people. And that is absolutely
Right.
okay, right? Especially coming right out of school. That's why you don't see a ton of junior consultants because it's not an environment where a lot of people can make that
Mm,
jump, right? From every day in the classroom, structured, this is what you're doing, to, hey, we have these deliverables. You kind of have to go find out and create those relationships on how to
yep,
do that. And a lot of times for them, that can look like failure because they don't know how to do that or they don't know what they're doing. And I think the farther you get in your career, you realize the highest paid consultants that are billing, at that $3,000 a day also have no idea what they're doing, right? They just know how to go into a project and figure it
yep,
out, right? No project is the
mhm,
same. That's why, again, big vendor marketing wants you to think that, oh, we do this all the time, but every business environment is a different and unique
yep,
DNA. So being able to go in there and figure that out is so, so critical. So if you are out there considering a consulting role, that's a big kind of reflection point for you. Can I do this? Do I want to
right.
do this? Right? Is it going to be a struggle for me to know that my team is scattered throughout the world? I'm not going to have a lot of FaceTime with them until I'm traveling or with my clients, and I have to understand time zones and travels and all of those different pieces of that. And I'm not going to have anyone checking in on me the entire time. It's my job to meet those deadlines and understand what that's like and say something when I don't. And that's just a huge consideration when you're going into a career like that. A lot of benefits, flexibility when you come out of school. We don't care where you live, really what time you work, as long as we have some consultants that work through the
Yep.
night, because that's what they prefer. I always call them like, Batman people because they're nocturnal and that's, but again, that's cool. I don't care, as long as we're meeting deliverables and our clients are happy and we have a team synergy, that's totally fine. So lots of benefits to that, but it's just a big understanding, especially for younger members of the team. It's interesting that Avery asked where you see a gap because I think the one thing I'll say, and you guys know I'm hard on higher education because I feel like, they need to show up for the future of work. And sometimes, speaking of ego, that can be a very hard community to say, you need to change the way you teach because we changed the way we
Mm,
work. But I will say that Colorado Mesa University, they try and fill
mm,
that gap. Here, we have an innovation team that actually goes out and looks for that gap with business owners to say, okay, you've employed students from our school. Where are we missing? And what can we do better? And I think that is such a critical partnership, industry and academia. And the case study for that is NASA. They use their academia colleagues all the time to help with implementation, research, and all of that. And in the business world, bringing in industry people and understanding how that's going to be for example, I'll give you like a micro example. I asked Mick, I always forget that like at my level and working with someone like me about the things that I totally forget to tell them. Do you have a passport? You know, do you have a headshot? And he mentioned the other day, he was like, I don't have a headshot. And I'm like, oh, like we should have thought of that a long time ago. I should have thought of that a long time ago. I just assumed coming out of school, you would have a professional headshot and you would have all those materials. So I called the professor and I'm like, hey, you know, are these students given these opportunities? And she's like, well, you know, kind of, but they have, I'm like, okay, next semester, we are going to come in and we'll fund the headshots and the resume reviews so that they can have those coming directly out of school. And she's like, awesome. You know, you can use my class time. You can use all. So that collaboration is how we fill those gaps. That might be something small, but it's absolutely critical going out into this job market that you understand that. So finding those gaps and closing them is really where industry meets academia, and that's how we collaborate as a
Yeah,
community.
absolutely. And I think to tie it back to something you said earlier too is learning to communicate with different with people that have different communication styles. Like you have to be able to talk to people from various backgrounds from different parts of the world. And like I feel like I learned that on a basketball team very quickly. You know, you have obviously your higher ups, your head coach, your assistant coach, your trainers, your managers. And so like you communicate with all of them, but then you also have teammates that are so different from you. Like I can't tell you how different the team is, but then you have to learn to work with all these different people in a very competitive and like highly competitive setting. So, you know, it's high risk, high reward. Like if you mess up, like you said, it's public. And so just learning to bridge that gap of okay, like what are we missing here? Like why aren't we as connected with this five as
Mhm.
we are with this five? Or, you know, these two people don't communicate well. And so how do we bridge that gap? Like where do we have them watch film together? Do we have them work out together? Like what is it? And so I think that that's a huge thing that I learned that also is transferable is no two clients are the same and learning how to communicate with them in a way that's comfortable with them. And even with your bosses, you know, like we had a conversation one
Mhm.
time about um, you know, like uh I forgot how exactly you asked me, um like how are you doing this weekend? Are you okay with me asking about your weekend? I'm like, yeah, of course. What? Like you can ask me whatever. Like I was out hiking. I was, you know, whatever, playing disc golf. And so
Yeah.
I think that like learning where clients and or your higher ups or your
Mhm.
coworkers kind of draw those lines in the sand and then learning to build a good relationship from those. Because like I said, no two people are the same. And I think trying to approach someone with a like blanket approach isn't necessarily a good
Mhm.
idea. I think treating people as individuals and building that relationship, cultivating that relationship through time is a really good thing, something I've learned in that experience as a student athlete. So
Absolutely. And that is such a good point, being able to kind of cross communicate across internal teams with different clients to show up to be what they need, because that's our job. You know, if they're feeling super defensive, we're not going to go in there and be like, oh, this project sucks. You guys are just really, really, you know, doing a terrible
right,
job in here, right? We need to show up and understand like what they're going through, and meet them where they need us to be, because nobody on earth, and I invite you to challenge me on this, has ever said, oh, yay, the consultants are here. I'm so excited to talk to the consultants,
right,
right? I don't even like the word consultants because as a career consultant, it still gives me the ick, right? I'm like, ugh, consultants. Like nobody wants consultants, right? But the job is to redefine that for the client and be able to meet them where they are and have that team ability, to really focus on, you know, how do we communicate and how do we make sure that we, you know, we show up as the team member that they need us to be. So that's such a good example. Let's go to another one here. Avery's just crushing it on the questions here. Another junior consultant who is absolutely brilliant as a CMU grad. She doesn't actually know how smart she is quite yet and what a rising star she is.
agree.
So um,
strongly agree.
How do yeah, right? If we could all be as smart as Avery, we would be dangerous,
Dangerous.
right? How have you built the habits of resilience and grit into your day to day? And I think this is something that a lot of times we don't talk about as graduates. I tell Mick about this all the time because I found it as a theory from actually Mel Robbins' research, and it's called the Great Scattering that happens in your 20s,
Mhm.
right? First, you are in this university, you have this culture, and then you graduate and you're done, either playing sports or you're done, going to school, being involved in that community, and everyone kind of scatters, and you don't have this core community, especially as a consultant. Most of us work remotely, right? We don't have an office community that you go in on a day-to-day basis. So I think it's important to understand and have grace for yourself of this is a huge time of
Mhm.
transformation. So how do you kind of keep that resilience and grit into your day to day?
That's a good question. I think it's funny actually. Avery and I had a conversation about this, I think a day or two ago, about how when you first get into a consulting role, you're not, you don't put your hands on things a lot. And what I mean by that is like you might not have a ton of deliverables. So like you can't really measure success per se, because it's a lot of learning up front. And so you feel like you're just constantly essentially struggling to figure it out. Like, am I
Mhm,
providing value? Am I not? How do I go about
mhm.
this? And so I think that the biggest thing is kind of getting through that initial learning phase and knowing it's supposed to be a learning phase and that it's going to get better and that you will see the value you provide and it will pay dividends in the back end. Like that's probably my biggest thing. It takes a little time and no one because you kind of go from your senior year, you graduate and you feel like you have things figured out. You know what professors you like, how their grading system works, whatever it may be. Then you go jump in this new role, and Colorado Mesa University does do a great job of preparing you for that, but nothing quite prepares you for like the hands-on experience of like now you're
Yes.
back to that low man on the totem pole. How do I start climbing that ladder again of putting the time in, being able to provide value, get these deliverables to your clients. And so when it comes like a day-to-day resilience, I would say just yeah, I mean that constant learning piece, like not being I think early on, and I talked to you about this too, is like you're afraid to fail and you're afraid to give someone a bad deliverable. And as opposed to, "Hey, can you help me with this? I don't know if it's up to par." They're like, "Oh, here's what I would change." I'm like, "Okay, perfect. Let me go back to work on it, and then I can provide more value on the back end or on the front end rather." And I think that just also building your community. I'm jumping around a little bit now, but
Mhm.
um,
No, yeah,
just having a
jump.
having a touch point with your coworkers because we are all remote, I would say that always helps running stuff by them and making it more of a collaborative process because I think that, as humans, we are social, at least most of us, I would like to think. And so uh, being able to have coworkers that help you and run ideas by them and um, help you improve these ideas you're working on, especially in that learning piece. It's so hard to feel I don't know, like, is this good? Is it not? What would you do? What are you thinking? And I think that really helps keep you going during that early phase, and it takes time to get there. And there is a light at the end of the tunnel. You just got to keep going. You will provide value. I think that's the biggest thing that I've come to learn. And so knowing that there's that light and having had success in more important meetings and bigger deliverables, that's what keeps fueling me. And, with basketball, the end goal is like a game, playing one a game. And now it's like,
Mhm, mhm.
killing a meeting or a status or whatever it
Yeah.
may be. And, really providing value and helping people accomplish what they want to accomplish. And so I think that would be having that goal in mind, but knowing that it's a process to get there. So just kind of putting your head down and
Mhm,
enjoying the process, as cliche as it sounds. Like that's something I've learned to gets me
mhm.
through the grit and resilience piece. That's what it comes down to. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's such a benefit to working for a smaller consultancy, because you get to experience, executive level consulting, as opposed to, working for the big four. You're just lost in financial spreadsheets all day, which is not a bad thing, right? Again, if you need that
Mhm.
standardization and more of not an entrepreneurial organization, that's not a judgment, but it goes back to knowing what you need, right? So, habits of resilience and grit in your day. How do you know that you need to work out in the morning, that you need, a breakfast before your first meeting? Those are the types of things that, as a young person, that takes reflection and wisdom. A lot of times, personality tests are where I point them in the first piece, just so that they can start to get curious about themselves. Again, just data points. What do you need? Do you need to go outside and touch grass, between meetings because you're like heads down and it's too stressful? Do you need to call a senior consultant to join you with these meetings because some people have weird control freak energy and like to bully younger consultants, which obviously we do not stand for. It is a pet peeve of mine personally, but it's it's one of those things where you've got to understand yourself so that you don't take feedback and think, I'm not worth this
Yep.
job. That is an understanding and a built in narrative that you've got to
Yep.
reprogram. You are more than worthy of the job. Everyone, right, gets to go through understanding and learning. How you embrace that learning is up to
Right.
you. And we always encourage, that cross collaboration, because you might learn something from a colleague. Mick and Avery have very different jobs, so a lot of times their collaboration, I mean, if anything like me, I understand like 20% of what Avery says because she is an AI
And you both.
engineer. She is extremely smart. But also understanding mixed client work. There's some clients that I rarely speak to anymore because they prefer Mick over me, which is awesome. That's the point, right? That is the point of being, a consultant and being that main point of contact. But he's gone through a lot of those different pieces where building that confidence was a muscle that he really had to work. Hey, can I run this by you? Hey, for the first few weeks, I really need you to review this for me so I feel comfortable sending it to the client. And we'll go through all of those different pieces. He knew he needed that. He knew he was able to communicate that. And that's a big thing that especially our younger community of young professionals don't take time to understand about themselves. And that's such an amazing gift and piece. So, all right, let's go to some more of these amazing questions. So, what was your thought process when building a structure for yourself? How did you figure out what worked and what didn't?
Oh man, that's a tough one. I'm more of a trial and error guy than a thought process guy, you know?
Everybody.
Yeah, I think that for me it was, can I sit down and work for 8 hours straight? Not for more than maybe a day. And then so like how do I break it up, and what what helps me reset, whether it's, like touching grass, like you said, going on a long hike, we'll say, help you reset a little bit. But I think that having those checkpoints during the day, whatever it may be, everyone's different. For me, it's going to the gym and just getting out of the office, stretching your legs. Maybe it's a walk. Maybe it's, if you're fortunate enough to have dogs or a boxer in your life, hanging out with the pups for a while. But I I
Yeah.
think something recently I've been blocking my calendar when I need like that deep work time. And so being
Mhm.
able to like, hey, like I'm not gonna respond to anything that's not high priority, and I'm just gonna get this high importance deliverable done because it has to be done. And it's learning to just prioritize that in a way that kind of serves your weekly, monthly, yearly goals, whatever they may be. And it keeps you fresh. I think that was something I ran into early was, sitting down and staring at one deliverable for 4 hours. And then it's like, oh man, my eyes are glazing over and I feel like I'm just getting nowhere. And then, you try and go get that review or whatever it may be. But learning to structure your day. And so like you kind of get to move to new tasks. And I think that's something like in basketball, there's so many aspects or related back to basketball, since that's what we're talking about. There's offense, there's defense, there's film you can watch, there's shooting, there's lifting, like there's just so many different aspects. And so like within my role, I feel that become it's to a point where it's diverse enough where I can change to a different thing if I need to. And that will oftentimes help with the structure of my day. It's like, okay, I can't look at this right now. I need a fresh pair of eyes on it. Kyler, will you help me out? And then moving to this thing
Mhm.
while you're reviewing it for me. And then it's like, oh, okay, that's what I was missing. Perfect. Let's circle back to that now. And I think just knowing that, I don't know if it's I just like that change of pace or what it may be, but learning that was a big thing for me when it came to the structure
Yeah.
of my day and how I like to work and what keeps me
Mhm.
going throughout like the course of, maybe it's a long week, maybe it's a ton of deliverables, maybe it's a deadline. So I would say that was probably trial and error was the biggest thing, but yeah, definitely knowing how I like to work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I would argue that that is a process,
Right.
right? That is you reach out for when you don't know how to do something. So, for example, Mick has a big travel week coming up, and he was like, "How do you do your
Mhm.
schedule?" And again, I didn't think to even, really educate him on that because it's not something that I'm still developing that muscle of my thought process of going, from managing a lot of senior employees, back to building my own consultancy and managing a lot of junior employees. So when we go to onboard our next, right, I've taken that failure, quite right, quote, quote, and showed like we need to do a day in the life scheduling building. But because he was able to say, like, what do you do? We were able to go through, oh, this is how you block your mornings. This is how you block time so that you can do what you need to do in the afternoon on site, all of those different pieces. So when you don't know how to do something, you ask. There are no questions that are too simple or likely. You can have some empathy for your leader of they just didn't think to tell me that, right? There's no nefarious issues there. It's just, they didn't think to kind of take me through that. So I'm going to ask. So that thought process that Mick is so good at is saying, I don't know how to do that, and really owning that that is a totally fine thing to say. And you learn how to own that early in your career. That is a superpower because yesterday I didn't know how to do something. And I called a colleague of mine and said, I don't know how to do this. Will you tell me like this piece? They might not know how to do it perfectly, but we can at least work together. That is never going to go away. And if it does, then you've reached a problem in your career, whether it's your own ego getting in the way, whether it's you've plateaued and you're not being challenged anymore. But if you are not asking that question of, I don't know how to do this, what do you do? Then that is an
Yep.
issue. I think both personally and professionally, the power of I don't
Yep.
know is really critical. It's something I struggled with when I was a young professional. I thought I had to have all the answers to deserve the job I have, when really, if you just say I don't know, I'll get back to you on that. Honestly, I have no
Mhm.
idea. Then that is more powerful and builds more trust with your clients and your colleagues than trying to make up an answer on the
Right.
fly. So I think that is a process that has really worked for you. And what didn't work, if it feels wrong, it is, right? So think about it, sit in it for a minute and be like, why does this feel weird to me? And it could be something as you decided at 11 o'clock you're going to work out, right? I'm going to block 11 to 12 in my schedule. And I'm going to work out for that amount of time. And then you find yourself rushing and you're so, I can't get this in. It's stressing me out. Okay, then we need to move the workout to before
Right.
work hours or something like that, right? So those pieces are so, so critical to really just sit in and understand. You don't have to know the answers right away, but having someone to go to, whether it's a colleague or a supervisor, are really, really important to have that outlook. So Cool. Let's move on here to a few of these other ones. I know Amy gave, you might not be able to see this huge comment, but hopefully you are. Amy, who is an executive coach, highly recommend you follow her. 10 out of 10. She's been my executive coach before, and is really amazing when it comes to how you build these professional skills. So she said interpersonal communication skills and emotional intelligence are key to working in an environment we're in today. She talked about with AI and things moving at such a fast pace, keeping human centricity at heart is so important. And that, is absolutely true, especially as we move into kind of a new type of workforce. And I won't peel back that banana right now, but the more versatile you are and able, to work with your machine colleagues or your human colleagues are so critical. I highly recommend personality types tests. If you need any recommendations, feel free to DM me. They're just a data point where you can kind of learn who you are and how you're testing. And even people, I always laugh at like the executives now that I work with that have never believed in personality types before. And now it's the number one thing they have to do as a very senior executive at Fortune 50 company, and they learn a lot about themselves. So do that earlier in your career, because really the power of being a leader comes from when you're in the cubicle farm, when you have no authority over your peers, when you have no authority over your teammates, right? Do they want to play with you? Do they want to work hard for you? It is so critical when you don't have that title or authority hanging over their head. That is much more powerful and proficient than, forcing them to do something. Cool. Well, let's wrap up just a few of these conversations with some tips that we can give our audience today when it comes to kind of failing forward, and what that really means. So I would recommend looking at Harvard research from their business school on failing. And that is, they have a few books from their professors on the art of failing forward. They have a variety of information there that you can kind of read about and get to know. I would say write down what you need to say in a point in which you're not sure what's going on. So I don't know how to do this project. How can I get help? And kind of have a conversation, even with a chat bot around that, and kind of get that structured for you before you go out to your colleagues, so you can organize your thoughts about what is really the issue here. Is it a certain feeling? Is it a story that I'm telling myself of like, I'm not smart enough to work in AI? We hear that all the time, especially from young women in our fields, of saying like, I might not be able to do this program. Well, most people couldn't do this program, right? So that's why we're working on it. We're building it together. I don't know how to do this program. So it's not something that comes with the worthiness of your skill set. It comes with how are you building it. And then I think the last thing I would recommend, and then I'll turn it to Mick to give some recommendations of his own, is tell the truth first, I always say. So admit that mistake. The power of, hey, I think I messed this up. I'm not sure. Will you take a look for me? Or, that piece of understanding that you might have made a mistake, and that's not a bad thing. That is a data point that you can learn in the future. Don't have any sort of misconceptions that people with a C in front of their title don't make mistakes every day. They absolutely do. And that is so true. And the more that you find a leader that you admire and listen to them, the more that you can hear them say, I wish I wouldn't have done that. I wish I would have done something differently in hindsight, or I don't know how to do that. That's going to earn you more respect than trying to make up like, oh, I thought I was doing this, but I didn't do this. You just messed it up. No big deal, right? we figure it out and we move forward from there. And then you can start from a clean slate for next time. So those are kind of my little pieces of advice to go out, source additional resources,
Right.
and to kind of try and own these micro changes in your day to day. Do you have any to add to
Yeah, I
that?
mean, a lot of them are in line with just what you said. I would say there, as you were talking, I was thinking about there was two books I read um, in the process of starting here and right before I started. One was The Culture Code, which is about highly successful organizations and what they all have in common. And to your point about transparency and the power of I don't know. In every hyper successful organization that they reference in the book, they talk about how there's an unfiltered, and that doesn't mean like mean, but like an unfiltered feedback session where it's like you meet with your colleagues and people tell you their honest opinion. And that is ties right into the other book I'm talking about, which is the biggest takeaway is be impeccable with your word. And so it's the four agreements. And
Oh, yeah.
it's a great
Love
book,
that
highly
book.
suggest, but it speaks to the just telling the truth and being honest and figuring out how you work as a person, and then speaking to that is so important for developing your just how you work and building trust and relationships with clients, bosses, colleagues, whatever it may be. Um, and I mean, straight back to that power of I don't know. It's so important, and um, I'm fortunate enough to have some great mentors in my professional circle that um, saying I don't know isn't a bad thing. Like that now
Mhm.
opens the door to like they know that you aren't trying to just put on this front that you do know everything, and then they can help you. I've yet to come across someone who doesn't want to help when you are truly struggling with a deliverable or whatever it may
Mhm.
be. And so I think that taking that and running with it as you develop, especially young professionals, of you're not supposed to know how to do all of that. And that was something I struggled with as someone who strives to be a high achiever was I should know how to do this, or I should. And it's just like, well, you can drop the should and like, I don't know. I don't know. And that's okay.
Mhm.
But I think both those books are great reads and really helped me kind of transition into this role and just my working career in general. Then my final one would just be that like it's uh it's gonna be a process. It always is. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's just for me, and I know it's cliche, but I mean cliches are cliches for a
No?
reason. It's a
Yeah.
process, and I think for me it took time, and I'm slowly building that confidence of like, no, I can provide value here. I don't know what I'm doing there, or
Mhm.
this is how I've seen this work in the past. Can we cater this to your unique situation or however you can apply it? And I just think there's so much value in that, and it's helped me along the way. And so that would be my final tip or trick, if you will. So, but
Yeah. I think that's great. And what would you say, maybe if you were talking to a fellow college
mhm,
athlete that's coming out of that go, 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 go environment and going into the professional space, it can almost be like a bit of a mourning period, right? Like you're
mhm,
completely changing your identity
100%.
that you've had probably since your first
Yeah.
memories. You've played sports since you were maybe 4 or 5 years old, and now 20 years
Mhm,
later, you're just supposed to "Oh, I'm not a basketball player
right.
anymore. Cool. Awesome." And that might be okay for a
Mhm,
while, right? Because you might be super tired of being a
yeah.
basketball player for
Yeah.
that amount of time. But then you kind of look at it and you're like, "Okay, but then who am I?
Right.
That's been a huge part of my identity." So maybe what would you say to those athletes that are coming out of that type of
Yeah. No,
transition?
that's a great question. I would say that as you make that transition, it is, I mean, it really, I'm sure it depends on what you go into, but
Mhm.
I think that the biggest thing is just to know that, I mean, it just feels like you're a freshman on the basketball court again. That's like the biggest thing. Like it's so strange. Like you go from kind of having to figure it out, and you have your friend group, you know where to go if you don't know something, to I have to rebuild these relationships. And I kind of think approaching it as a rebuild whether it's a week, month, year of your professional career. And cultivating relationships is probably the biggest thing.
Mhm.
Take on a mentor, ask people for help that you respect and admire that are in similar roles to you. Run stuff by people. I think that um, building that out is something that has so much value because it just is
Mhm.
like, oh, other people have gone through this before. Like, I'm not the first college athlete
Mhm.
to go like struggle a little bit during this transition. And I think knowing that in itself without any context is like, oh, okay, so people have gotten through this before. I can do this. Like
Mhm.
it's possible. And it's just knowing what works for you and then, make note of things that you like and or dislike as you get into your professional career. Like for me, I love the flexibility of being a consultant. I also love the
Mhm.
client facing work. I love the ability to go get dinner on a special occasion and then work from 11 to 2 in the morning because that's just kind of who I am. I don't, the 9 to 5 isn't necessarily for me. I can do it, but just getting, I don't know, like in tune, for lack of a better term, with what works
Mhm.
for you as you make that transition and reform your identity because it is a tough thing. You've been an
Mhm.
athlete for, the better part of 2 decades. So it can be tough to kind of set that aside and be like, all right, well, now that the ball has stopped bouncing or, the
Mhm.
glove is down, whatever it may be, who am I?
Mhm.
And it's
Mhm.
just cultivating that. It's a hard thing, but and then just staying true to yourself. Like you are who you are. You didn't
Mhm.
get to play at a high level without being who you are,
Mhm.
and a lot of those skill sets and attributes that got you to where you are will also transfer to your professional career. I think just kind of having that as your cornerstone is something that you can lean back on when you feel like you're struggling. So that'd be my
Yeah,
piece.
that's beautiful. Yeah, very profound. And, I think there's an element to let it,
Mhm.
right? And that's
Yep.
the hard part about athletes is they wanna fix, they wanna go, they wanna, troubleshoot, and that's not a bad thing, but this is a huge transition, and people don't talk about it a lot because of that resilience and that mentality of, like, "I'm gonna go win in the next area of my life," and I'm sure you are, right? But giving yourself some grace to go through that
Yep.
transition, you're away from a team. You might have, a couple friends, in your new spot, but it's not something that, you're eating team meals every night. You're not doing that
Yeah.
anymore, right? So it's a time that you need to let
Yeah.
exist, right? And hopefully you're in a professional environment that can support that transition and celebrates, your accomplishments on the court, but also how that's translated to the
Yeah.
boardroom because it does. I promise you, some of the most successful CEOs I know are former college athletes because they just have that ability to build and
Yeah.
lead and get out of the way
Yeah.
when they need to get out
Yeah.
of the way.
Absolutely.
So that's a big piece of it.
No.
Well, this has been such a fun conversation. Definitely, thank you to the audience for all of these great questions. We always go back in and answer them. I know Mick will, I know I will. And if you have any questions as you're watching the replay or you have any, additional thoughts on this, we definitely invite your insight too, as we know there's a lot of people out there that have gone through these types of transitions. And we also know everyone in the professional world has lost at some
Mhm.
point. So understanding that and having that dialogue is going to help us learn how to fail forward. So I invite you to put your experience in the comments as well. So bite size, you can find us
Mhm.
wherever you get your podcast, also on YouTube. I myself have LinkedIn, TikTok. You can follow Mick on LinkedIn as well. He does a lot of our client LinkedIn work, so that's something that he's a pro at this point. And then we also invite you to follow the Confluential if you'd like as well. That's our company page. And you can find links to that below in the description. And we are live on Bite Size every week. So next Tuesday, we're talking about hybrid workforce, which will be a super interesting
Mhm.
conversation about what's the state of work look like? What do our machine colleagues look like, and how do you invest in that as a business without absolutely burning your culture to the ground? And that we've seen so many times. So that will be a very fun conversation next Tuesday, so look out for that. We also have the Confluential Live on Fridays. We're just live all over the place, so definitely join us there too. So thank you to the audience. Thank you, Mick, for
Thanks for
joining
having me.
us, and we will see you guys next time.
All right.
Yeah.